As we do on a Monday, we like to check in with the Australian Christian lobby, elements of what is changing, what sort of campaigns are developing, the things that are really quite challenging in the environment politically. And very good today to be able to connect with Peter Abetz, who is the Western Australian state leader for the Australian Christian lobby. Peter, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thank you, Neil. Good to be with you.
Hey, Peter, in WA, there's been some reform around abortion legislation. The Abortion Legislation Reform Bill 2023, tabled back mid-June, and the bill effectively provides for abortion on demand up to birth in WA. How are you seeing things as they are at the present time?
Look, you're right. Up until now, the 1998 legislation's been in place when West Australia was the first to apparently legalise abortion, and you could only have an abortion up to 20 weeks. You needed two doctors to agree that it was appropriate, and post 20 weeks, you needed to get approval from two doctors from a panel of 10 that the Minister for Health appoints to say that it was in fact medically appropriate to have that abortion. So as a result of that, we only have about 70 to 80 late-term abortions in Western Australia, and generally they were only allowed for conditions not compatible with life or for gross deformity, that type of thing. But the legislation that's been read into Parliament now, that's ready for debate when Parliament goes back, basically says after 23 weeks, or you can have abortion for any or no reason up to 23 weeks, you don't need a referral from a doctor, you can go straight to the abortion clinic. Post 20 weeks, you just need to get one extra doctor to say that the abortion is justified. So psychosocial reasons for abortion, for late-term abortions, will be acceptable, which will no doubt see a massive increase in the number of later-term abortions.
Peter, something very concerning that you're drawing attention to, and that is the way that a incumbent government might actually find research that supports their own positions and their own proposals. They had an online survey in the Health Department in WA. You were concerned because a lot of Christians decided they wouldn't complete it because it didn't really offer the right options or any other options other than what the government was proposing. How do you see that? What happened there?
Well, basically, what the Health Department, they did a report and put proposals forward, and they did a survey online, and some 17,500 people apparently responded. But the only choices you had was maintaining the current legislation or agreeing with their proposed changes. That was the only options you could have. So it was really a kind of survey which wasn't really a survey, if I can put it that way. You only had two choices to choose from. And so, for example, if you were of the view that abortions, for example, shouldn't take place, say, after 13 weeks, which many even pro-choice people say because of the medical issues involved, there was no option for that. It was either maintain the current 20-week or go with 24 weeks, which incidentally they've pulled back in the legislation 23 weeks for some reason. But that's the kind of situation that we were faced with. So, and the government claimed that the survey showed massive support for what they wanted, but we encouraged people to complete the survey. But I got so many emails from people saying, I'm not going to finish. I didn't submit mine because there's no way that I agree with either of the options that they give us. So that's not particularly helpful.
So when you hold a pro-life position and you're fairly dogmatic about that, responding to a survey that actually lands you in one camp or another, they're both pro-choice or both pro-abortion, that doesn't sit easily. Hey, what about the contrast? What is being proposed now? What are the provisions in the new legislation?
Well, basically, the new legislation says up to 23 weeks, you can have an abortion for any and no reason. all you need to do is you need to go to an abortion clinic and you can have it done. So you don't need a referral from a GP or another doctor or anything like that. So it's very, very easily accessible. And post 23 weeks, you can go directly to the abortion clinic, make an appointment, and as long as the abortion clinic doctor gets another doctor to agree that the abortion is justifiable, then it can proceed.
And, of course, that doctor can be chosen as someone who's a pro-abortion doctor or even an abortionist. Is that the case that could actually give that second signature?
That's my understanding from the if the abortion clinic had two medical doctors working there, there's no reason why the second doctor couldn't say, yep, this is okay.
So when we talk about change that's coming, are there changes coming around, counselling requirements? Because there's always this concern when you have pro-abortion, as is the case in many other states, that there's no counselling that is given that has any sort of pro-life feel to it. What are your thoughts here around what's being offered in these new legislation provisions?
Well, the 1998 legislation had a provision in there for a counselling that the person had to receive counselling, but in actual practice that was not happening. All they were given was a sheet of paper which they had to sign, which outlined some of the risks apparently of abortion, etc. But there was really no genuine counselling, and in fact. The Honourable Nick Goyron, when the Barnett government was in, managed to convince Kim Hames, the Minister for Health, to put on the abortion brochures contact details for some of the pregnancy support centres in WA, but when Labor came in, they were taken off again. So the reality is that there's no requirement for counselling in practice under the 98 legislation. Just simply wasn't happening, and under the new legislation, it's that clause is removed, so there won't be any requirement for counselling.
And the likely outcome of that, Peter, is that there's more abortions, more late-term abortions.
Well, look, I think the outcome of it is that if you think in terms of if a person was genuinely pro-choice, that women should have a choice, they need to be given all the options. And the reality is that the support that's available, most doctors are not even aware of the pregnancy support centres and the services that they offer. A lady recently looked up the government website to do with abortion, and if you need support with an unexpected pregnancy kind of thing, she rang up 4 of the phone numbers that are listed and said words to the effect, look, I've got a friend who is pregnant, unexpected. She would love to keep the baby. She just can't manage financially, etc. Can you refer us to someone, an organisation or a service provider that can help? And of the 4 government centres, only one actually said, yes, there is a pregnancy support centre and provided the phone number. The other 3 said, the only help we provide is abortion, which that's hardly giving women choices.
And Peter,
so that's a real shortcoming.
It is, and I think every listener will be able to hear that there ought to be some sort of provision in any way that if someone's calling for help, that there ought to be some pregnancy help organisation that should be on that register. Hey, the other thing, of course, is people who are in the medical profession, doctors, nurses, and as we're seeing in some other states and territories where medical professionals are being put under pressure to perform abortions, no way that they can conscientiously object in any way. What are the provisions around this legislation in Western Australia around medical professionals, whether they're doctors or nurses?
In the 1998 legislation, a doctor can simply say, or a nurse can simply say, I don't want to be involved in an abortion, and that's the end of the story. Like if a patient comes to a doctor and says, look, I want to have an abortion, the GP can say, look, sorry, I don't deal with abortions, end of story. Under the new legislation, the doctor must provide them with information so that they can contact a doctor who will do an abortion, which effectively makes the doctor an accessory to an abortion, which for many doctors is a real problem because they don't want to be an accessory to an abortion. And an interesting point is that an abortion is actually not a medical procedure in the sense of a procedure that actually improves the health of the woman. So it's not that you're denying somebody, life-saving treatment or anything like that. So really, it's a violation of the doctor's human rights, and that's one of the changes we'd like to see in the legislation. Is that the current conscientious objection provision is actually maintained.
Peter, I love conversations with you because you've got such an orderly approach to how a Christian might think about these sorts of things so far as legislation goes. And there is this potential, isn't there, that whenever we're talking about a pro-life position, a Christian position on the value of life, and we can all identify that from Genesis chapter 1. God has created man and woman in his image. And the reason why he is, he's creator, and that gives us all value in our life. And so we take a pro-life position. But I wonder, Peter, what is the Christian way of making a contribution when legislation is changing like it is? What sort of things would you like to see in the legislation?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really important point. Like, we don't want to see abortions happening, but the fact is this legislation, and because of where our society is at, abortion legislation will pass. So the best we can do is to seek to make an evil piece of legislation slightly less evil by getting some changes into it. And one of the things that we want is we want to ban on gender selection abortions, because that's starting to happen in some ethnic communities in Australia. And in fact, in Southeast Asia, China, India, there's over 100 million girls missing, which leads to bride trafficking and all sorts of social issues. So we are seeking that, and one would hope that even radical feminists would be able to support that, because having an abortion simply because you're carrying a girl hardly seems something that feminists would want to see happen. So that's the one. The other is that any babies born alive following a late-term abortion should be given the same medical attention, or if it's a condition not compatible with life, palliative care, as you would provide to any naturally born premature baby. And that's going to become much more important with the ease of being able to get a late-term abortion. So we think that's a really, really important one. The other one that we're pushing for is, back in 1998, the consensus amongst the medical professionals was that babies don't feel pain till about 23, 24 weeks. But the research has moved on, and it's now generally accepted by medical people that babies actually feel pain from about 13, 14 weeks onwards in the womb. And so we actually are pushing for that it's mandatory for medical practitioners doing an abortion to actually provide pain relief for babies that are aborted post 13 weeks. And you might say, well, what's the big thing about 13 weeks? Up to 13 weeks, babies that are being aborted are simply kind of sucked out, complete. Whereas after 13 weeks, as the bones have started to become stronger and so on, after 13, 14 weeks, the way they actually abort a baby, it's pretty gross. They actually pull the arms and the legs off and then crush the brain, the head, and then pull out the pieces and then reassemble them to make sure they've got everything out. And to do that with to a baby that feels pain, that is absolutely abhorrent. And there's one of our vets who's a supporter of ACL, he contacted me and she said that if if she did that with a lamb or a calf, the animal rights activists would go ballistic, and so we kind of think this is really important. And if they claim to modernise the legislation, they need to take into account the latest medical knowledge about these kinds of things.
And
the other thing we're pushing for is
as confronting as that might seem, and for listeners who might be feeling shocked that you might make that sort of description, this is reality, and in some sense, we've got such a sanitised view of what happens in the abortion process sometimes that we're a little blasé about whether it really matters. But what you're demonstrating in the description there, Peter, is very, very confronting, and it's very powerful, and this is the reality of what happens in that abortion surgery. You were about to give us some of the other. I don't want to miss any of these provisions that you're arguing and pushing for. And we were talking about, whether there are, some pregnancy help providers. You'd like to see information brochures and websites, all with these sorts of details on there, so that anyone who is contemplating abortion actually has a real choice to make.
Correct. Yeah, we believe that's really important, and I think the South Australian legislation that went through in 2021 when they updated, inverted commas, their abortion legislation, they actually had a number of provisions added into it, which included the gender selection abortion, the ban on that, the babies born alive, and they also actually put in some things that a doctor needed to take into account when being asked to do a late-term abortion. And while it's not easily enforceable, that provision, at least it says, hey, as a society, we believe it's important that these things are taken into consideration. So we'd like to see the four of the extra things that are in the South Australian legislation, which aren't in the WA legislation, that they should be included, and I think that would make a big difference.
You're also wanting to uphold that right of conscientious objection, so for everyone in the medical community, doctors, medical staff, to be able to exercise their own conscience as to whether they want to participate in an abortion. And the other thing, of course, too, is some safety and privacy and dignity provisions for unborn children too, who might have some level of disability. Thoughts around that one?
Yeah, look, it's probably a difficult one to get across the line, but we're advocating for the fact that when couples or a mother is informed that her baby has a fairly high chance of having Down syndrome, they're always immediately offered an abortion. And we believe that really is not the right way to go about it, that really when you get that diagnosis, they should be connected with Down Syndrome WA, which is a support organisation that parents set up years ago who had Down syndrome, children with Down syndrome. And so the parents can actually find out, hey, look, what would be involved in having a Down's child, so that they can actually make an informed decision rather than automatically pushing them down the abortion pathway. Because we don't want to become like Iceland. In Iceland, there are no babies born that have Down syndrome because they abort them all. And those of us who know people with Downs would know that, hey, they can live very fulfilling lives, and they certainly add a lot of colour and joy to families and into communities.
So many just beautiful individuals. And look, time is running out, but Peter, there is a petition on the Western Australian Parliament website. I know you're pointing people there, and I'll assume that you've got a link there on the ACL website, and I'll give that address in just a few moments. But what are you encouraging Western Australian listeners to do right now, given the changes coming?
Look, if they can go to the ACL website, so it's just acl.org.au, and then /abortion, and then go to the WA section, and there's lots of information there where we encourage you to write a letter to your local MP, and particularly to the MLCs, the legislative councillors, and people have 6 of those in Western Australia because each region has 6 legislative counsellors. So encourage people to write letters, and there's also some of those points that I've been talking about with you, Neil, are listed there. So the dot points are there. They can take some of those and put them into their letter, and also the links for the petition.
If you don't speak up, the government will ride roughshod over you, as has already been the case in other states listening into our conversation today. Western Australian listeners, an opportunity to speak up. And if you don't speak up, you'll lose at least some of the provisions that have given a little bit of extra light there so far as the abortion issue. So acl.org.au and /abortion. For those listeners in WA, go to the WA section, and those hints and those provisions that Peter has said you can do, and you can take up an opportunity in WA to have your voice heard. Peter Abetz, WA State Director for the Australian Christian Lobby. Peter, thanks so much for your update again today on 2020.
Good to be with you, Neil.